Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Today is November 17th. Josh Naylor is the first big domino to fall. We have the Hall of Fame ballot for 2026 and the AL West for instance needs. Let's talk about it. Hello, everybody. My name is Steven. This is the middle of the order. How are we doing today? Not the AL, whatever I said, the AL West. For inching needs in today's episode. How are we doing, folks? The off season, it is continuing, and it is continuing on a crawl, but we have some big news, some of the first big news from the free agency for this off season. And we might as well just jump right into things and get things talking about it. Josh Naylor is signing with the Seattle Mariners, or should I say re-signing with the Seattle Mariners. We do know it's a 5-year deal, so that will keep him as a Mariner until 2030, expecting similar stuff than, in most big contracts, trade clause, wiggle rooms there at times. The value of which contract is yet to be announced, and this is still a pending deal. Of course, all free agency pending, physicals and all this stuff. But most deals you usually get made official in weeks time, whatever. But the estimated range from what people are saying, somewhere between the 90 and 100 million range there. So about 19.75, 20 mil is an annual value there, the AAV. And Josh Naylor, what do you want from a player, from a first baseman that Naylor isn't? He's been in the league for 7 years now, going back to 2019 when he was with the Padres. Yes, people forget that he was with the Padres. He was traded to the Guardians during the COVID year in 2020. Spent 18 games in San Diego before finishing the other 22 games with the Guardians. And from that point on, he has been Cleveland faithful. Plenty of solid years in Cleveland, including his one and only All-Star appearance, which came in 2024, which was the last time he was with Cleveland, because the Guardians then traded him during last year's offseason to the Arizona Diamondbacks, where he was with Diamondbacks at the start of this season. But of course, Arizona's early season kind of went away from them pretty quickly, so they ended up shipping him to Seattle at the deadline, where he was very solid with the Mariners. In 54 games with them, he had 58 hits and 210 plate appearances, cracking 9 homers to finish up 20 on the year, with an 831 OPS when he was with Seattle. His numbers as a whole last year included a 295 batting average and 816 OPS. The big thing that came with Josh Naylor last year was the stolen bases. In his 6 years before last year, the most he'd had in 1 year was 10 stolen bases, which came in 2023. Arizona and Seattle got use of that. Arizona alone had 11 stolen bases. Seattle, when he got the ship, had 19 stolen bases. Josh Naylor had 30 stolen bases last year. He's not the fastest runner. He's not the greatest runner by any means. In fact, he's probably one of the worst base runners in baseball, but he has a great eye when it comes to taking his lead off of first base, which made him be able to swipe so many base bags. And it wasn't even just stealing second. He was able to steal third a couple times as well. So that's a skill that, you can continue to harness. Despite not being an all-star this year, it was his best year in the big leagues as a whole. 3.1 WAR, the most he's ever had in a single season through 147 games. Seattle needed to bring this guy back. I think Seattle had a very solid team. They came up short in the ALCS, falling to the Jays in Game 7. And, they're losing a couple of their big top, the trade acquisition guys that they grabbed, Suarez from also Arizona, Josh Naylor, Jorge Polanco. That's 3, top-end players that they're now in free agency, and all of which are infield pieces, mind you. Bringing back Josh Naylor is a start. That was the priority, I think, for Seattle. They mentioned that out of the 3, they'd want Naylor the most. And now they picked up Josh Naylor, who in a 7-year career has an 8.4 WAR with just over 104 home runs. The OPS 777, but of course some of his numbers when he was with the early stages of Cleveland and San Diego, weren't the best. We didn't see Josh Naylor at his best, but from 2022 on, he's been getting 100 plus hits in each and every single season, playing north of 120 to 150 games. So he is a valuable piece, and he's a strong hitter. He's got plenty of power, left-handed bat, everything that you really want from a first baseman. And for Seattle, this kind of continues to clog a need, which we'll be talking about when we talk about the Mariners. It's kind of perfect that we're talking about Seattle making the first signing here with the AL West free agency needs that I'm doing coming up a little bit later on here. I think it's a great move for Seattle, and I think it's a great move for Josh Naylor, and it sets the tone for free agency. You always kind of wait for that first domino to drop, and then other moves will slowly start to trickle. Some of the other bigger names, obviously not the biggest names go, but you'll start to see some of these guys being like, okay, especially with the first baseman, with the Josh Naylor signing, a lot of news has come up about Pete Alonso now because, hey, if you're a team that's been looking for a first baseman, one of the best two, really, when you think about the first baseman available, Josh Naylor is right behind Pete Alonso, and with him gone, now it's like, do we race for Pete or do we have to, settle? Do we have to find, call up someone from the farm system? There isn't too many options. You have the veterans of Justin Turner and Paul Goldschmidt. If you want to take a chance on like a Josh Bell, Wilmer Flores type of bat, a little bit younger but still kind of towards the back half of their career. There is a Rhys Hoskins who could be a gamble there, or even a Cody Bellinger if you want to play him at first base instead of the outfield. He does both that way. But Josh Naylor was one of the top first basemen, and that kind of opens up what you're going to see for Pete Alonso. If it seems to take 5 years, $100 million, Alonso could take 7 years, 180, like something like that, 150. Like it just depends on who's calling and what they're talking about. But Naylor resigns with the Mariners. I think it's great for Josh Naylor. I think it's great for Seattle. All in all, this is a winning move, and it's a good move and a good one to start the offseason with. Speaking of moves, we had a couple other signings that came out. Two minor-ish ones. One being the Padres have re-signed Kyle Hart to a 1-year deal with a club option for 2027. Kyle Hart, he's nothing to scoff about. He was in the baseball world in 2020 during the COVID year with Boston, where he pitched in 4 games, giving up 19 earned runs. He's a 15.55 ERA. I have to assume it was just one of those games that you had to just leave him out there because you need to save the bullpen, so he just worked and worked and worked. But his numbers that year in those 4 games, yucks. Last year, didn't play in the majors from 2021 to 2024. Last year was his second year in the big leagues after about a 4-year hiatus from Major League Baseball with the Padres last year. Pitched in 20 games, made 6 starts, 5.86 ERA, giving up 28 earned runs, which means in a 2-year sample size where he's played in 24 games, making 9 starts, a 7.83 ERA. So yeah, nothing to be like, wow, this is a great move. It's just a depth piece to filler piece. Maybe he can tap into something, but Kyle Hart, he's just around for the Padres for this year. The other signing that happened was that the Yankees have re-signed Ryan Yarbrough to a 1-year deal. Yarbrough, of course, if you know him for jumping around the AL East kind of. He's been with the Rays, he's been with the Jays, was with the Yankees last year, and yeah, I mean, he's a very solid left-handed pitcher. He has the ability to get you some really good starts, some really good outings, whether you use him out of the bullpen or, however you see fit. Last year with the Yankees, a 3-1 record, 19 games, 8 of which were started, 4.36 ERA, pitched 64 innings with 55 strikeouts. Again, very solid, piece to have. Despite this, the Yankees did not choose to use him in either of the rosters in the wild card round or in the division round for the postseason. Part of that maybe because the Red Sox and Jays have very good right-handed hitters who, there wouldn't have been much use for him being a lefty specialist. The Jays have Varsho, Jimenez, and Lucas, really, Barger off the top of my head. The Red Sox, there was no Roman Anthony, obviously, no Devers, obviously, because those guys were both gone. But they have a lot of their mashers being right-handed hitters. Carlos Navarez, Ceddanne Rafaela. So there wasn't much use for Yarbrough, so he was kept off both rosters. But he's been a solid pitcher before. Top 5 in Rookie of the Year voting in 2018. Solid years with the Rays. This is a solid, mid 3 to 4 ERA kind of guy. 8 years in the big leagues, a 4.22 career ERA in 215 games, 76 of which have been starts. So he's always been a guy, sometimes makes a start, sometimes comes out of the bullpen. But yeah, solid move for the Yankees, and we'll see how that continues to work for him. Of course, no values have been announced with these signings, so it's just kind of, take your word for it and go from there. But that is where we're at now. So a couple moves there for the offseason as we continue to roll on. Let's talk about the Hall of Fame ballot because it was announced. The 2026 Hall of Fame ballot features 27 players, I believe, if I did my counting right, but I might have miscounted. 12 of which are new to the ballot, first-year ballots. Of course, you need at least 5% of a ballot to stay on and continue into next year if you don't make it. And if you're able to collect the 75% mark that you need, you will be elected into Cooperstown. That is how the ballot works. Going through the ballot here, Bobby Abreu in his 7th year, Carlos Beltran in his 4th, Ryan Braun, his 1st year on the ballot, Mark Burley, his 6th. Then a couple of first-year ballots in Shin-Soo Choo, Edwin Encarnacion, Gio Gonzalez, Alex Gordon, and Cole Hamels. Felix Hernandez in his 2nd year on the ballot, Torrey Hunter in his 6th, Andrew Jones in his 9th, Matt Kemp in his 1st, Howie Kendrick his 1st, Nick Markakis, Daniel Murphy, both of those guys in their first years as well, Dustin Pedroia in his 2nd year, Hunter Pence in his 1st year, Andy Pettitte in his 8th year, Rick Porcello in his 1st year, Manny Ramirez in his 10th and final year on the ballot, Alex Rodriguez his 5th year, Francisco Rodriguez his 4th year, Jimmy Rollins his 5th, Chase Utley his 3rd, Omar Vizquez his 9th, and David Wright his 3rd. Those are the players on the Hall of Fame ballot. Of the new guys, the guys who are on their first year here, the guys that stand out to me, Ryan Braun, Cole Hamels, maybe. Yeah, those are the only two that really stand out. There's obviously some great names on this list, some all-time ball players. A guy like Edwin Encarnacion, who's a Jays legend. A guy like Alex Gordon, who's a Royals legend. A guy like, Howie Kendrick, who, despite playing on numerous teams, goes down as Nats legend for his 2019 playoff run. Daniel Murphy, his Mets playoff run back in 2015. So there's some interesting names here. Some guys who you kind of forgot about. I mean, this is the type of players now that, I started growing up watching baseball with. So, seeing Gio Gonzalez, man, he was one of those players that I just loved to watch. And I forgot about him for a long time until he popped up on this list earlier. So, really cool to see Gio Gonzalez on this list. And, hey, I think all these guys, I would love for the Hall of Fame to be full of guys that, are in my book and guys that I love, but obviously then that kind of defeats the purpose of the Hall of Fame aspect of it. A guy like Shin-Soo Choo, Guardian or Indians legend, I guess, and as well as Rangers, there's some history there with the Reds as well. In terms of the guys who are on the ballot, continuing on, the big names, of course, being Manny Ramirez, Andrew Jones, Omar Vizquel, and Andy Pettitte. These guys are in the 8th+ years, Manny Ramirez being in his 10th and final year. So if he is not elected into the Hall of Fame this year, he will be removed from the ballot regardless and will not be a Hall of Famer here. There are some interesting names, though. Felix Hernandez and Dustin Pedroia are two guys that were kept from last year who are entering their 2nd year. I think both are very, talented players. When I think of them, obviously I think of Seattle for Felix and the Red Sox for Dustin Pedroia, but, Could they have enough? Maybe, if injuries weren't there. A guy like David Wright, Jimmy Rollins, I think these two guys, off of what I've seen, and they could potentially be a Hall of Fame guy. I don't know. Anyone who is casting a ballot can choose up to 10 guys to place on their ballot. You have to choose at least one. And then, it needs 75% of the ballots cast. And I think I'll make my ballot, in the coming weeks here. I'll just kind of shoot one up and choose some of the guys here and make what I would do if I was a baseball writer, and go from there if I was part of the BBWAA. But that is the class of the 2026 Hall of Fame ballot. The ballot. Again, 75% if you are elected into Cooperstown, and you need at least 5% to continue to battle for the Hall of Fame into next year. So that is what the Hall of Fame ballot is saying. And we'll continue on here, and let's talk about the free agency needs of the AL West. We started doing this last week. We've done it from the AL East and AL Central, so if you missed that, check out older episodes, the last 2 episodes really. Today is all about the AL West, finishing up the AL, and we're going to start with the Houston Astros, because they are in an interesting position. They're losing some notable names here in free agency currently. A guy like Chas McCormick, who's been an outfielder for them for quite a while. Backup catcher Victor Carantini. But the two kind of big names here, and I say two, but it's mostly one, both come from the starting pitchers aspect, which is Luis Garcia and Framber Valdez. That's the big name, one of the big free agents to hit the market this year is Framber Valdez. When you look at the Astros lineup as a whole, there's still, similar pieces that you liked, but it is kind of that end of era feeling for the Astros that were so dominant for many years here. Although they now have Carlos Correa back to join with Altuve, they have Pena, they have Christian Walker, Yordan Alvarez. They have some really solid players. The bench, I say, is a little bit lackluster. I mean, Jesus Sanchez as a backup, or a backup outfielder, and when Urias as the backup infielder, I mean, sure, does the job, but I think you'd hope for something a little bit more oomph. The starting rotation is still solid for the Astros. Hunter Brown, Christian Javier, Lance McCullers Jr. There's some notable names there, but obviously losing Framber, that's a big piece, so you're going to be looking at starting pitching. Same thing with the bullpen, obviously. They have Josh Hader, who they did lose to injury, Brian Abreu. I mean, those are two of the top, 15 arms in the bullpens. But the bullpen could use some work. The pitching could use some work. And that's going to be kind of a reoccurring theme with the AL West. A lot of these teams need pitching. Whether the Astros re-sign Framber, but they need to get a starter to replace Framber regardless, and then maybe some depth, maybe some center fielder help, losing McCormick. Maybe you can call up a young kid and kind of place him out there in center, see what you can do. Or you can go out and sign someone. I've got guys like Yastrzemski and Grisham, depending on how crazy you want to get for center field. Potential fill-ins there. And then for the rotation spot, a guy like Zach Gallen could make a lot of sense. Maybe a guy like Shota Imanaga, I would find it hard for him to go to Texas, just, in terms of him personally. But if the Astros make him a nice deal, he could fit in really well with this Astros team here and be that lefty to replace Framber. So some moves there that the Astros could make. I definitely think starting pitching is going to be a name of the game here. So and that's what I've done for a lot of the AL West teams, because I think a lot of them could really use some starting pitching help. Continuing on, let's talk about the Angels. And the Angels, again, have always had a very solid team. They actually have a list full of free agents, ranging from guys like Luis Garcia, Yoan Moncada, Kenley Jansen, Chafin, Tyler Anderson, Luis Rengifo, Chris Taylor, etc. Plenty of names here, but they have plenty of guys that they are still holding on to. And, when you look at that lineup, a lot of them are young kids or just veteran kind of presences. Zach Neto, Nolan Shanuel, Joe Adell, solid guys there. You think of the veterans, Jorge Soler, Taylor Ward. Of course, they have Mike Trout, Logan O'Hoppe entering his 4th year in the big leagues already. Christian Moore kind of replacing, that second base hole, I guess, and, 23-year-old there. So Angels lineup is still solid, but again, I say solid. we haven't seen the Angels in the postseason since when? 2014. So it's been a while there. The rotation is always where I look with the Angels because they always try to do something to address it, and it always backfires crazy, and they always have issues when it comes to their rotation. Right now, Yusei Kikuchi is apparently the ace of the staff, which, again, solid year, good pitcher. To be called the ace of a staff, I don't know about that one. Jose Soriano had a really solid year. He was probably one of the best pitchers on the Angels last year. Lee Detmers, Caden Dana, the 22-year-old who, got some big league experience last year. I think he will continue to develop there. And then the bullpen, obviously, no Ben Joyce yet. He went down with a shoulder surgery back in May, so not sure when he will be back and ready to go, assuming sometime maybe June-ish, depending on his rehabbing. But again, like the Astros, like the lineup, it's solid. Yes, you can plug in some pieces to get better, but if you're going to spend some money, starting pitching, that's where the Angels need to look. I also have them linked to a guy like Zach Gallen, guys like Miles Mikolas, even a veteran presence there just to fill a spot. Maybe you go and grab a Lucas Giolito. Maybe you go grab a guy like Zach Eflin. Maybe you keep a guy like Tyler Anderson. Maybe you go out and get a top-end guy. Go get a Michael King or a Ranger Suarez kind of guy. Like there are plenty of options, I think, for the Angels. A Herman Marquez makes a lot of sense. Find these guys, try to tap into something. Same thing with the bullpen. They're losing some pieces. Maybe they bring back a Kenley Jansen. Maybe they go out and get a different veteran reliever like a David Robertson. I think they need some infield depth as well, so maybe they bring back Yoel Moncada. Maybe they bring in a guy like Isaiah Nakana-Falefa. So the Angels have, a lot of holes to fill. It's obviously been a tough couple of years, with one of the best players in baseball and then the best player in baseball. Remember, this is now going to be their third year without Shohei. And to think that the Angels had both Mike Trout and Shohei on a team at the same time and didn't make the postseason, I'm speechless. Now that I think about that, that is a very wow. I feel for the Angels fans out there. Hopefully they can get some starting pitching to help them out because their team desperately needs it. But yeah, I think the lineup that they have currently, there is talent among it. From the 1 hole down to the 7 hole. A big thing would be keeping Trout healthy, keeping their players healthy. And then, seeing what you can get out of it, because I think if you get some starting pitching, the Angels could be a good team entering 2026. Of course, there is a very tough AL West division. The Astros are a very good team. Rangers are still very good. Of course, Seattle, the defending AL West champions, and the Athletics, who are coming into their own. So if you're the Angels, pitching is the must, and, kind of focusing on that is where you should be looking at. Moving on here now, let's get into the Athletics. The Athletics had their first year away from Oakland, and it was weird. Yep, I'm just going to say that. It was weird. Did not like it, but we are entering another year of the Athletics before they become whatever they become, Las Vegas Athletics, Las Vegas, etc. But they will be back at, that diamond that they were at. I forgot the name off the top of my head there. Emergence. That was the name of the A's in 2025. You got Rookie of the Year, Nick Kurtz. You got second in Rookie of the Year, Jacob Wilson. You throw those two along the likes of Shea Langoliers, Tyler Soderstrom, Brent Rooker, Lawrence Butler. I got to be honest, I love this A's lineup. I really do. It's one of my favorite lineups in baseball. I think the A's mash. I think 1 through 9 even, they have a very solid lineup. The big thing that the A's lacked is pitching. Surprise, surprise. They, of course, had Mason Miller. They say goodbye to Mason Miller, shipped them off to the Padres last year at the deadline. So the bullpen, it's names that you don't know. To be honest with you, the only guy that kind of stands out as like a guy would be Hogan Harris. That's not to take away from a guy like Tyler Ferguson or Brady Basso, Michael Kelly, etc. But, when I look at other bullpens, there's at least, 2 or 3 other guys that you kind of be like, oh, yeah, I know him. He's a solid guy. I think some of these guys had solid years last year. And I think that's an important factor going into 2026. But the bullpen, of course, needs work. But that starting pitching rotation as well. Luis Severino, first year, big contract that they had given out. And he had a lot of issues last year, complained a lot of things, had some good rotations, some good starts, but as a whole, not a great first sample year for Severino, Jeffrey Springs, Luis Morales. So there's some guys here, but you'd want more. And again, not to say that the window is opening for the A's, but like I said, there's a very talented AL West division. I think the A's have a very talented roster and a very talented lineup that can go head-to-head with the Mariners, the Astros, the Rangers, etc. They need starting pitching. So go out and get, some top-end guys if you really want to, or, you kind of make do with what you can get. A Wade Miley, a 39-year-old Wade Miley, maybe. A Nestor Cortez, 31 years old, maybe. Can you go out and maybe get a Steven Matz? For sure. For bullpen pieces, a guy like, Kirby Yates? If you want to go out and get a big fish, maybe Raciel Iglesias from the Braves, get him. Go and get maybe one of the Rogers brothers, Tyler Rogers. I mentioned Matz. A guy like Patrick Corbin could be a decent fit. A guy like Paul Sewald, 35-year-old veteran guy for the bullpen, could be a nice add there. Jacob Junis, same thing. Maybe you go get a Michael Lorenzen for the rotation. There are names here that you can kind of fit in with the A's, see what you can get out of them, maybe trade them at the deadline, depending on how well they're pitching, etc. But I think the rotation is where the A's really need to dig into and to really address the issues. Otherwise, it's going to be continuing to lose years on this young talent that they have. Brent Rooker, remember when this guy came up and was like, oh my God, who is this 31-year-old now? He was the A's, only solid player, and now he's, entering his fifth year in the big leagues, and Nick Kurtz is entering his second, and Wilson will be entering his second. Lawrence Butler already entering his third. Same as Soderstrom. Langoliers entering his fourth. The clock slowly starts to tick on some of these guys, and next thing you know, Brent Rooker signing somewhere else, and then Soderstrom signing with the Yankees, and someone signs with the Dodgers, etc. Another team, and then the whole thing gets reworked again. Obviously, it's a little weird not having a Major League Diamond and Major League talent a facility where they can really showcase these top-end players, but they have a top-end lineup. We could maybe see playoff baseball for the Athletics sooner than you think. They had a really strong start to the year, and I say strong start as in the first 2 or 3 weeks, and then they had 2 tremendously poor losing streaks and had the worst month of baseball that I had ever seen play. They had I think they were at one point 8-22 or something like that in their last 30. Yeah, that's how you throw away a season. They still bounced back though and finished ahead of the Angels. And like I said, when all things are firing on cylinders, I think the A's are a very good, solid baseball team. We just have to see that firing on all cylinders point of view. So that's where we're at there with the Athletics. Pitching, same as the Astros, same as the Angels, same as the Rangers. As we'll talk about the Rangers here. Texas, another good team here. A lineup that features guys like Wyatt Langford and Corey Seager, Marcus Semien, Jake Berger, Adolis Garcia, Evan Carter, names that you know. Jock Peterson, of course, a name that you know, but a name that you kind of want to forget if you're Texas. He had a very, very bad first year with the Rangers, hoping for a very big turnaround this year, I should say. He finished with negative .8 WAR. That's how bad he was in 2025. You got a catcher duo of Jonah Heim and Kyle Higashioka, which I think among catcher duos, that's a probably top 5, duo in baseball. Of course, Heim dealing with a lot of injuries last year. Don't forget a guy like Josh Smith, who had a very solid baseball year on the calendar. So some notable names there. Obviously, the bullpen, again, like I say pretty much all the time, every bullpen could use some work here. But Josh Boras, Jacob Webb, Robert Garcia, there are some names that some names that you're like, okay, this is a good first couple of guys. Now you go and add someone else here, someone else here. The rotation, I mean, who knows where the Rangers could have ended up if Nathan Eovaldi didn't get hurt. Eovaldi was on pace for one of the best seasons I had seen in a while. He was pitching phenomenally. He had a 3.7 WAR and a 1.73 ERA, and he only pitched 130 innings, 22 games. He missed towards the end of the year there. Eovaldi was great. Jacob deGrom, comeback player of the year, he was fantastic with Texas. A 2.97 ERA, 3.4 WAR. That's what we had been waiting to see out of Jacob deGrom. Of course, the emergence of their young talent in Jack Leiter and Kumar Rocker. They both had pretty decent years. I think obviously Leiter a lot better than Rocker, who had his more struggles. But I think there's a spot there in the rotation that opens up. If you're Texas, obviously Merrill Kelly, Tyler Mahle, and Patrick Corbin, three guys who are all in free agency, who all had decent moments. Patrick Corbin, had a surprisingly good year with Texas. Tyler Mahle, he was hurt for a lot of the year, but when he was right, he was one of the better pitchers on the Rangers staff. So, there's a hole to fill there in the starting pitching slot, I gotta say. And for me, the one guy that really stands out, where if I'm Texas, I'm like, let's circle this guy and go get Framber Valdez. How good would that be to take one of your AL West rivals, your state rival, both teams based in Texas, go get Framber Valdez, take him from the Astros, put him on the Rangers. I think that's a really five-head move from the Rangers if they want to do that, if they got the money to spend. But yeah, like the other teams, starting pitching. That's pretty much the name of the AL West. Hey, all of you guys need starting pitching. They're going to be in on a lot of these guys together. Guys that I've mentioned like Zach Gallen. Maybe go get a Chris Bassett. Maybe go and try for a Shota Eminaga or a Michael King, a Brandon Woodruff. I really think Texas can land one of these top starters. And then maybe, you address the bullpen need a little bit. Maybe go get a Michael Kopech for the bullpen, a Chris Martin, go and re-sign him, 39 years old if you want to bring him back for another season. Go and get maybe a Pete Fairbanks or a Hunter Harvey for the bullpen as well. So Anthony Dominguez. So a lot of pitching options. All five teams really need pitching. I think Texas, though, has the biggest capability to fill in a top-end slot. Obviously the Astros can go and get a guy like Framber, maybe go and get Framber, but I think Framber, either with the Astros or Rangers, makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I think starting pitching is the definite big thing for the Rangers to address here. Obviously, some depth as well, just in case Jock Peterson really struggles, and now you need another move somewhere. But you need Dos Garcia to kind of bounce back. He had a tough year, same as Jake Berger, who, there are some guys who just didn't perform to the best of their abilities, and the guys that were performing got hurt. Corey Seager, some time on the IL. I think Langford spent some time on the IL as well. Those are obviously their top two players from 2025 that were on the lineup and not the rotation, but yeah, I think for Texas, starting pitching is definite the must there. Which brings us to the last team in the AL West, and that is, of course, the AL West champion, Seattle Mariners, who, of course, we talked about earlier in the episode. Josh Naylor re-signs with them already. The lineup is solid with Julio Rodriguez and Cal Raleigh and Randy, and, there's just top-end talent there that Seattle has. Of course, they have one of the best rotations in baseball from guys like Brian Wu, Logan Gilbert, Luis Castillo, George Kirby, Bryce Miller, and that's not even everybody. There are some other guys who can be big additions in their bullpen. A guy that we've seen a couple times, Emerson Hancock, who has been up and down. Logan Evans, same thing there. Like the rotation. Seattle is the one team here that doesn't need pitching when it comes to starters. Of course, the bullpen can always get improved. Of course, they have one of the best bullpen arms in Andres Munoz, a guy like Matt Brash, Gabe Spire. So some very strong arms there. Again, you could never have too much bullpen help, so I could see them going and picking up a couple guys there. Maybe one of the Rogers brothers. Maybe a guy like Rafael Montero. Maybe a guy like, Michael Soroka, or maybe like just some depth there. Emilio Pagan could be a top end guy there for them to get in terms of the bullpen. So you kind of look at the lineup. Of course, Josh Naylor comes back to take his role over at first base. Polanco leaves second base open. Suarez leaves third base open. So one of those two guys you could see come back. We do, right now they have Cole Young and Ben Williamson slotted into second and third base currently, who were two young kids who, got some time in the big leagues last year, 22 years old, 25 years old. You could see one of these guys. You could see maybe a guy like Leo Rivas, who would pick up a role, pick up one of the bases there. Maybe a guy like Luke Raley or Miles Mastrobuni. So they have guys on the team, in the system, that can take up second base, that can take up third base. But I think you could also go out and continue to spend a little bit of money here. You bring in Naylor, maybe you bring back Jorge Polanco. I think that would be smart. If you want, instead of Suarez, there's a big name that you can go and get. And his name is, of course, Alex Bregman. If you want to go down that route, if you want to spend some money, Bregman could be a nice add there. Maybe if you want to go and get maybe a Luis Arias, get a contact bat. Of course, Seattle, very good when it comes to contact. You'd be looking for a little bit more power, but I think Luis Arias would be a great add for the Mariners there. If you don't end up getting Polanco back and you go and bring in Luis Arias, maybe bringing Gleyber Torres to play second base. That's a solid option there. Can go and get maybe a Willie Castro, who had an interesting year with the Cubs, of course. So there's names that you can definitely go and get, plugging guys to second, plugging guys to third, but they also can go a different route, save some money, maybe, spend some more in the bullpen, and then, bank on one of their kids and their young farm system talents to kind of take over at second, kind of cape over at third, and then, make trades at the deadline if they need to fill in fixed slots, whatever. I definitely think another infield is needed. Of course, losing, at the time of when I wrote this originally, Josh Naylor, Polanco, and Suarez. That's three guys all playing the infield. You bring back Naylor, so that's now two guys for the infield. I definitely think you need at least one guy, so whether you go and get a second baseman, you bring back Polanco or Gleyber, etc., or you bring back Suarez, go get Bregman, go and get, a third baseman, Arias, etc., whatever. I think you definitely need to get one more infielder, second or third, and then maybe you can, use your farm system to kind of finish up the infield there and spend some money elsewhere if you're Seattle. But you won the division for the first time. You made it to the ALCS. You made it as far in your history as you ever gone to a Game 7 of an ALCS. So if you're Seattle, you got to spend some money. You have to continue to improve this year because the window, windows we've seen can be open for teams for a long time, for 5+ years, but we've also seen teams whose windows open for a year and a half, 2 years, and then it's shut right back down. The Mariners are in a tough division. I've mentioned it plenty of times. Add, be better, and hopefully a Seattle Mariners season in 2026 postseason that can end maybe in a World Series appearance. So that's what you have to do there if you're the Mariners. The one team in the AL West that does not need starting pitching. Ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for our episode here today. Our first big domino has fallen in Josh Naylor with Seattle. We've continued to go over the free agency needs that I've been looking at and doing. We have finished with the AL. Now that we've done the West, so in the next episode, we've got the NL East to start, then the Central, then the West. So 3 more episodes of that. Then we'll wrap up that aspect of the free agency here. The offseason continues to roll. I love you all. I appreciate you all. Thank you, everybody, so much. And I will see you on Friday.